Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. So in today's webinar, we shall discuss 6 practical approaches to supply chain planning transformation and systems implementation. My name is Winfred Amorako, and I'm the growth marketing lead here at Akiva. Our presenter today is Tepan. Thank you so much for joining us, Tepan. But before we get started, I would like to mention that if at any point in time you have trouble hearing us, please let us know by using the chat feature in the GoToWebinar, and we'll be sure to assist you. So also, we will reserve a few minutes at the end of the webinar for questions. So please feel free to enter your questions as you think of them using the GoToWebinar questions window. Next slide, please. So I would like to first start by introducing Akiva to you. And so I'm going to give you a brief overview of Akiva. Next, please. So at Akiva, we believe that improved business performance starts with better planning next. And as a result, your Akiva team has only one goal in mind, which is to ensure that you achieve your better planning goals without forcing you to fit a software mold. So we celebrate your unique business processes, and this gives you the power to keep your business processes intact. So we start every Akiva solution creation process with just one question in mind, and that question is, how can we empower you with a better planning process? So our goal is to put you in the driver's seat to steer your improved business performance goals. Next, please. So next, please. So I'd like to give you also a quick overview of our solution suite. And Akiva One Plan sales and operations planning solutions are used today by over 17,000 users worldwide in the process and chemical, food and beverage, consumer packaged goods, and discrete industries to plan supply chain operations for product revenues of over $50 billion. So over the years, we have expanded our reach, and Akiva is now a global supply chain planning software provider with offices in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. So we define One Plan as an integrated demand-driven sales and operations planning for dynamic business performance. And it promotes cross-functional synchronization across the company, starting from integrated financial planning to demand planning, inventory management, to create a more dynamic S&OP process using real-time dashboard. So our discussion today encompasses every layer of our solution suite. Next, please. So firstly, I would like to start today's discussion by giving a definition of what supply chain transformation is all about. So transformation is about creating a future without the constraints of the past, while change only creates a better version of what already exists. So John Westerman of MIT once said, when digital transformation is done right, it's like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. But when done wrong, all you have is really a fast caterpillar. Next slide. So to set the right expectations of today's discussion about what Tepan is going to talk about, I would like to just give a few key points on the 6 different things to look out for when embarking on the supply chain planning transformation. So firstly, Tepan is going to touch on the importance of people, process, and technology, and the interactions between them. And Tepan will also dive deeper into the process element and the different planning transactions. In that context, he would also talk about the role of ERP versus the supply chain planning system, supply chain planning system. Then we would also talk about the importance of providing the necessary tools and training for the people involved in this whole transformation process. Since a company can be made up of multiple and different business units, Tepan will be talking more about what standardization versus not Tepan will be talking about what should be standardized versus what should be specialized for each business unit. Eventually, we will round up the discussion by talking about the specific steps needed to select the appropriate technology to help with the transformation process. Without further ado, I would like to just hand over to Teppan to lead us through today's discussion. Carry on, please.
Thank you, Win. So we are going to share with you the supply chain planning transformation approach. We'll start with a company environment description, like the company that we worked at, and then we will lay out the high-level transformation journey approach, and then we'll talk about some components and the principles and tools that we used to do the transformation, and then finally we'll conclude the presentation with the systems implementation framework. So as part of the people, process, and technology. So the company that we are using as an example, so for the sake of this presentation, we'll call this Big Corp. It has multiple divisions. It is in diverse with the diverse businesses, and they sell their products into different sectors or the markets, like the housing, food, defense, automotive, packaging, consumer products. So it's a pretty diverse business, and it has different manufacturing processes in different business units. There are discrete manufacturing, bulk manufacturing, field manufacturing, batch manufacturing, semi-continuous manufacturing. And on top of that, there were another layer of complexity that we had in many business units of multi-stage manufacturing. So the first stage could be a batch manufacturing, and the second stage could be discrete manufacturing, and so forth. So there was another layer of complexity in this presentation, in this company. So the key points for this is that the company had many different supply chains. It has diverse product lines. It has diversified markets and customers, and it has diverse manufacturing process types, and it sells into different sectors of the economy. And so they go through diverse macroeconomic effects. So for example, some sector like the housing sector might be going through upturn, whereas let's say the food or consumer product sector might be going through the downturn. And so the planning system needs to accommodate these macroeconomic effects. This company actually started their supply chain journey at different times, so they ended up with the diverse software systems. And also the same company in the multiple divisions, they might be doing the demand planning in a different way. So there are diverse processes. So with that in mind, we started a transformation journey to fix a lot of the issues that this company had because of the diversity. So the first thing that we did was we adopted a process-driven approach for supply chain transformation, and we adopted the industry-leading best practices from SCORE, APIX, Supply Chain Science. Then we standardize the business process, we standardize the software systems, we standardize the solution implementation approach, and we standardize the solution rollout approach, while we also build the people competency. Now, the standardization did not mean that one size fit all. We retained the business specific uniqueness to support the competitive advantage. And how we did that, we'll describe that at a high level in the next few slides. Now, in any supply chain transformation journey, we recommend that you use some kind of a process reference framework. So in this particular case, we use the SCORE because it is a standard that was developed by about 700 companies, and it is pretty rich. So the first thing that it recommends is that you do some kind of like an as is and to be state analysis, where you understand where you are at, and then you define where you want to be, and then sort of develop your journey map. In doing so, you need to do some kind of a benchmarking, to understand where you stand against your peer group of companies. So, for example, in your the benchmarking study, you find out that the delivery to request is at 70% versus your peer group where they are at 80% or 90%, for example. So you want to close that gap somewhat. And in doing that gap closing, you may have to come up with some management practices and some software solutions. So as you can see here, you have the process, you have the metric, you have the management practices and the software solution. And then also you need to develop some kind of a people competency. So the people, process, and technology, these three things needs to be addressed in developing the improvement journey. So that's what the SCORE process reference framework actually recommends. And in developing the process, you need to use some kind of a BPPM tool. So at a high level, these are the basic components that we used. Now, systems implementation journey, the traditional approach is that you go to a business unit, you collect the requirements, and then you roll out the demand, supply, scheduling, and so forth, business unit by business unit. But instead, what we did was that we stepped back and we developed a process standard. We'll explain how we developed the process standard in the next slide. But we developed a process standard based on some industry-leading best practices that came from SCORE, APICS, and supply chain science. And we developed an integrated standard process model. Now, the word integrated is really kind of important here because most companies, they operate in functional silos. Whereas the integrated by integrated, what we mean is that there are cross-functional integration between, let's say, the finance and the sales and marketing and the sales, supply chain and operations and the logistics. It is like a cross-functional integrated process model. Once we have this process model, then what we did was we looked into a business unit, looked into what they're doing, and we did some feed gap analysis against the standardized process model that we have. And another thing that you may want to consider is the use of some kind of a solution design lab where you prototype some aspect of some limited scope of the business just to try out the solution. And once you have a solution based on the standard practice, then you roll out the solution to the different business units, and that's like a demand, supply, and asset scheduling. So that is process-driven systems implementation journey. So here is the process standardization framework. We'll go into a little bit more detail. So in our previous slide, the first block was the standard process model, first two blocks. So you develop the global standard business process model based on the industry reference model, the SCORE, APICS, supply chain science. And then you also do the business level process model by business unit. And once you do that, then what you will notice is that you will find some common processes and there are some business specific variants for it. So for example, BU1 and BU3 might be doing the batch manufacturing, even though they are in a different industry, like the one might be in crop protection, the other one might be paint manufacturing. But the key commonality between these two businesses is that they use batch manufacturing. So they drive this standardization based on some key guiding principles. So what comes out of this analysis is that you will find some common process and you'll find some business specific process variants. And in the solution design lab, what we did was we developed some kind of a template based on the common processes that will be common across all business units. And also in the solution design lab, what we did was we designed the solution. We enhanced this template, which is based on common process, by the solution, which is business specific process variant, which kind of enhance the template. So the standard solution, the standard common process plus the business specific variant together, you develop the solution. So once you have the solution, then you roll out the solution business unit by business unit. So that is the standardization framework. And another thing that we recommend is that you do some like a diagnostic or business readiness assessment to understand like where things are at, like where do people understand the hierarchical planning? Do people understand the integration of the weekly process versus the monthly process? Is your process functional silo or truly cross-functional? How is your technology? I mean, so you create some kind of a heat map, and then using that you design your journey roadmap where you incorporate the people competency development, the solution design, process improvement, and then you start with your, let's say, S&OP process, which will drive the legs in the planning, which is the supply, demand, and the product management. We also recommend that you use some kind of a continuous improvement cycle, because as the time goes by, the process evolves, the technology evolves, and so you periodically look at those and then improve or modify things as the time goes by. So that is the journey to supply chain excellence. So with all this, so we'll summarize the business supply chain transformation framework. So this slide kind of summarizes the basic approach. So what you do is you start with a business strategy, because that is the starting point. And for multi-divisional business unit, you first define the global standard process, like you identify what are the common processes, and based on that common processes and using the industry leading best practices, you develop the global standard process. Then you compare that process, you find out how the tool or the technology that you selected, how it supports the standard process. So you do some kind of a mapping. And once you understand this dynamic, then you configure the system. So that is the standard system configuration. So now you have some kind of a template. Now, when you go into a business unit, then you understand the business as is. And then you map the standard process, which is your to-be state. You compare that against your business as is and develop some kind of a journey map. And once you have that, then the business to-be then map that to the system based on the standard system configuration. You start with the template, and then you add the business specific variant to the solution design, and then you have a technology that is addresses the to-be state. Generally, then you roll out the solution to the business, and most companies do it this way. And this is really a recipe for failure, because the key thing that is missed is the implementing the business, the to-be process. This is where I think the most companies don't do a good job, and this is really a key to success. So that is the BPM based supply chain transformation framework. So now we talked about BPM quite a bit. So in the next couple of slides, we'll introduce the concept at a very high level, because this is a topic in and of itself. So before we go into the BPM, we'll talk about the people competency first. The people competency is really kind of a very important, because generally it is not budgeted, and it is used as an afterthought. So give priority instead of an afterthought. Define standard roles and a standard work for each role. So for example, define the roles for demand planner, master scheduler, and and define the work that this role will be doing. So that is the business process. I'll give you an example. In one of the companies that I have worked on, is that there is a demand planner who is in Asia Pacific. He does his work in differently than his counterpart in Europe and North America. So that's not a standard work. So you have to define what is the work. And an example of a standard role. So there is another business where the master scheduler in Europe, for example, he's doing asset scheduling, and in North America he is doing master production scheduling. So that is not the. So that is that's where they lack the standard role. So you have to define the standard role and the standard work, and that is some work. And developing the training curriculum, so you need to build the competency in two levels. One is the technology, like the proper, efficient, effective use of the tool, and the subject matter. So for example, the demand planner who is doing the demand planning, he should be familiar with the best practices in demand planning. So that's a subject matter competence. And when doing the demand planning, then he should be able to effectively use the tool to, let's say, do the history cleanup, for example, and the generation of the strategical forecast, for example. So that's the technology competence. And post rollout, we consider I would recommend use of buddy planner. The example would be, so for example, in every company has some kind of like a planning cycle. So let's say the first 3 work days of the month, you use that time to develop the demand plan, for example. Now, you give a new tool to the demand planner, and he may not have the necessary competence in using the tool effectively. So he may have difficulty in doing that work. But if you have a technically competent expert sit down with him for those first 3 days, then he will be able to not only do his work, but he will be able to learn and pick up the technology specific competence. So we recommend that, I mean, you assign a buddy planner for 3 to 6 planning cycles. Generally, that has worked pretty well. So next we'll come to the BPM. So what is business process management? So we'll go into the definition of business process. We'll talk about the business process model, and we'll talk about the business process management. So what are business processes? Excuse me. It is a way to document people or the role, for example, and the work people do, and the technology people use to do the work, and also the performance measure for the work that they do. So in other words, strategy and data. So these are all documented in a business process model. And the process that is, so the characteristics of process is that it needs to be repeatable, it needs to be measurable through some properly defined KPIs. Process should be effective and efficient, so that is the part of the design, and it should generate value, otherwise you would not be executing that process. And the processes are visible through the use of business process model. It evolves over time, and it needs to be managed through the mechanism called business process management. There is a saying that managing business is managing process, and I think it is very true. I mean, most companies they struggle because they don't view the process as the business asset. So so what is BPM? So BPM is a management discipline that provides governance for the process-oriented organization. It uses the methods, policies, metrics, and management practices and software tools to manage and continuously improve an organization's business process. It is a way to connect performance objectives with business process. It supports process standardization. So as you can see here, I mean, generally the most companies operate in functional silos. And when you develop a cross-functional integrated business process, then you move from the functional orientation to process orientation. And as you do that, then as the time goes by, you manage your process through the mechanism of BPM, business process management, which we just described. And it is an ongoing journey, not a destination, because you define a process, but your business changes, market changes, customer changes, product changes, and it may bring in some changes to your process. So it is an ongoing journey to keep pace with these changes. So now that we learned the BPM, business process management, with BPM with what? So must use some kind of like an industry reference model like a SCORE, APQC, and use the benchmarks and best practices from SCORE, APICS, and other industry standards. And the business process modeling is another key component. We talked about it briefly. It is the activity of representing processes of an enterprise so that the current process may be analyzed and improved. And you use some kind of a process modeling technology. One technology that is pretty commonly used because it's called ARIS, Architecture for Integrated Information Systems. And then there are different modeling standards like EPC versus BPM. And so these are the three key components that you use to do the BPM, the business process modeling or business process management. So now we are going to talk about the SCORE and APICS planning hierarchy and how we mapped them. So in SCORE, there are two class of processes. One process is called plan process. So the P1 is the plan supply chain, or so generally, so we map the SNOP aggregate planning with the P1. P2 is the plan source, which is the MRP. P3 is the plan make, which is master scheduling. And P4 is the plan deliver, which is the DRP. And in the execution processes, there are source, deliver, return, and the make. And the make we map to asset scheduling. So in our initial journey, we recommend that you pay attention to these 4 or 5 areas to begin with. Now, you need to understand a little bit about the SCORE planning hierarchy and how it relates to business process modeling and the business process management. So we'll start with an example of source, which is an execution process. So the level 1 is, so source is S. So level 1 is the scope, which is the source. Level 2 is the S1. So under source, there is a S1 process called a source stock product. And within that, there is an activity called receive product. So SCORE actually gives you a process reference framework, which has these 3 levels, which has been established by about 700 member companies. They looked across, and they figured that these are the necessary steps that are to be executed by all companies. So that's a good starting point. However, it is generic. So for example, receive product could be very different for a, let's say, semiconductor manufacturing company and a chemicals manufacturing company. So those details you capture in level 4, which is called workflow. So that is company specific. And in executing those business process, you need the support from a transaction system or a planning system. So that gets captured in the level 5. So that is the the SCORE hierarchy. So now we take this as so now we go and look into an example of a planning process and see how that kind of maps. So level 1 is the plan. And then the level 2 is the plan supply chain P1, plan source P2, plan make P3, plan deliver P4, plan return P5, and so forth. And then the plan source in level 3, SCORE recommends these 4 activities. The first activity is the identify requirements, identify resources, and then the third activity is that you balance the resources with requirements, and then you establish source plans. So the score gives you this three structure, and then in level 4 and level 5 you capture your company space. So for example, for plan source step 2.3 p 2.3, you capture your company specific details at level 4. So and in level 4, and then the system transactions in level 5. Hopefully that is clear. So this is just another diagram just to where we want to show like so this is the diagram from Apex and we kind of mapped the score levels or the planning functions into these different Apex box. So this is just to show like how we sort of map the Apex framework with the score plan elements, and it is the first step in our journey to the BPM based process design. So now we are actually going to jump into the systems implementation framework. So we talked about process, we talked about the business as is, we talked about the standardization, and so now so the last step in the score process reference framework is the solution design. And the solution design, you need a technology. So how you go about using the technology? So there are some things that we experienced, and here are some recommendations that come with it. First of all, mostly when we evaluate a solution, we look at the standard functionality out of the box, and we want to go with that. But make sure when you are picking up a tool that there are some business specific requirements that if you ignore in the beginning, then you may come to regret it later. For example, one of the companies that we worked with, I mean, has like a return of empty containers was an important component in their planning. So how to do that if you don't consider that in the evaluation process, and how to easily configure that, and whether or not it is easily configurable. I mean, if you ignore that in the initial evaluation, then you come to regret that later. So kind of like a box 1 and box 2 kind of come together, which is you not only look at the standard features, but you also figure out how to incorporate the non-standard feature, and how easily it is configurable to accommodate the non-standard feature. The third block, which is the one link versus entire chain, what that means is that, so let's say for budgetary reason, you start with the demand planning, but make sure that you do the evaluation for the entire supply chain and entire functionalities, because you may start with a tool that has a pretty fantastic demand planning capability, but then it does not have the necessary asset scheduling or planning capability, which you did not pay much attention to in the beginning. The planning versus transaction. So there are different types of planning. So for example, in DRP space, for example, DRP is at a pretty high level, weekly bucket, 6 to 9 months. But if you, let's say, are expecting the planning system to function as your TMS, or the vehicle routing process, vehicle routing system, then you'll probably be making a mistake. So make sure that the planning, you properly understand the scope of the planning and leave things where they should belong. Like the TMS should be done by TMS, and don't try to execute the TMS work in a planning environment. And also make sure that the vendor is your right partner, because it is a journey, and your need might evolve over time, and so your vendor should be willing to work with you to help you make successful. So this is the example where we found that the most companies do not understand the difference between the monthly process, weekly process, and daily process. And then even in the daily process, there are difference between the execution process versus the daily planning process. So we have a S&OP monthly process. We have the MPS, which is weekly process. So S&OP, monthly S&OP process should drive the weekly MPS process. And the weekly MPS process should drive the daily continuous time scheduling process. And the scheduling process should drive the other transactions in the ERP system. So here is the domain of the yellow, pink, purple box is the domain of the planning system, and the gray box here is the domain of the ERP system or the transaction system. So here actually we are going to talk about a few things. One is that the demand planning, for example. So here are the software capabilities that are needed to support the planning at different buckets and the different time frames. So demand planning at family level happens at the monthly time bucket. And this demand plan is at the S&OP level, so for which you need the capabilities, the supply chain science, or the features in Archiva, for example, is the segmentation, stat forecasting, collaborative forecasting, aggregation, disaggregation, which is a key capability, the forecast accuracy metrics, and then the demand planning at SKU level, weekly time bucket. We have the demand plans. This demand plan is at MPS level. And you need the same capability that you need for the demand planning at the monthly bucket. The aggregation, disaggregation is the key here. Similarly, the inventory planning, this is the monthly time bucket. You need to define the inventory policies and targets that is used by the planning system. You need to have the software supply chain science capability that are incorporated in Archiva, the safety stock targets, the multi-echelon inventory, the inventory projected inventory calculation. These are all capabilities that have been, these are necessary in successful implementation of the solution. Then the P1, which is the aggregate planning at family level, which is a monthly time bucket, monthly bucket for 18 to 24 month time horizon. The output for that is the aggregate production plan, and this is primarily required by the S&OP IBP type process. P3 is the master production schedule, which happens in a weekly bucket, roughly about anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And the output for this process is the optimized blending, product mix, production rate, creating capacity feasible master production schedule. The P2 is the material requirements planning. This is also in the weekly time bucket, how much raw material is needed and when. P4 is the DRP, which is also in the weekly time bucket, how much to ship, when to ship, what is the shipping mode, load building. Now, to execute these different capabilities that are needed in P1, P3, P2, and P4, the aggregate plan, master production scheduling, MRP, DRP, the supply chain science that are needed is the LP, MILP based optimization, and these are all also available through the Archiva framework, through Archiva. And the make or asset scheduling, which is the continuous time campaign sequencing to balance transition cost, inventory cost, and late penalty to reduce total cost, just-in-time scheduling. The supply chain science that are needed and also supported through Archiva is the meta heuristics. So, for example, genetic algorithms, simulated annealing, taboo search, network algorithms, and things like that. Algorithms like that. So, in this chart, we are talking about like who should participate in this journey. So, how should your team should look like? It is a mix of internal and external partner, and it is a mix of business and technology folks. And the external team should have a strong collaborative partnership with the internal team. And this is a pretty strong team. They should work as if so there should not be any distinction between the external and internal partners. They should all be working together with the common objective of improving the supply chain performance through the transformation. So I'm almost at the end here. So what are the key takeaways? So the key takeaway is that start with the business process. Make sure you define your monthly process, weekly process, daily process. Make sure you adopt a reference model, which is really important. I mean, I know a very large company that started their BPM journey, business process journey, without the use of a reference model. And 6 months into the work, I mean, they basically abandoned their work and then they adopted the SCORE model and restarted their work. So BP business process is really a key enabler for your process standardization, without which you cannot really achieve that. Pay attention to people competency and change management. Ensure that the team is knowledgeable about people, process, and technology. Integrate planning with execution. We showed one slide a few slides back. Integrate. So let me go back to the slide just to make that point. This slide I was talking about is, so here is the integrate the planning, the monthly, weekly, daily with the execution. Identify relevant measurable KPIs and then monitor KPI for superior performance. So with that, I am ready for questions.
So thank you so much, Tepan. So I want to ask you this question. So what if a company in quest as a supply chain center of excellence, would you still recommend an outside process expert like ourselves?
Yes, actually, the supply chain center of competency or the supply chain center of excellence, they have a group of people who are expert in many different areas. However, they may lack the necessary the solution component expertise. And so, as we say in the SCORE process reference framework, you have the as is to be, you have the diagnostic, and then you have developed the management practices, but the solution design needs to come from the external partners in most cases, and that's how we have worked in the past.
Got it. So I would also like to take this opportunity to open up the pipelines for questions from our audience. So please, if you have any questions, kindly type in your question and ask it right now. In the meantime, I also want to say that if you are interested in a demonstration from Akiva, please go to our website at akiva.com. Tepan, can you move to the 2 slides before this so I could show them how to go on our website to request for a demo? Correct, this one. So you can go to akiva.com/demo or contact our info@akiva.com to place your request for demonstration, and we'll be very excited to help you with that. Whilst I wait for you to put in your questions, I have some few questions for you, Tepan, as well. So can you give us examples of like, or an example of standard feature versus non-standard feature?
So there are several. I already gave one example of the return of empty, planning for the return of empty containers. That was one. Another example that I have is that we initially did not consider the need for the business to synchronize the production lot sizing with the distribution lot sizing. And so we had to use some additional work to really make that happen. So that is another example of a non-standard feature. Generally, most software do not have this capability. So that is one other example, and there could be many others.
Got it. So how much time would you say it would take for a transformation journey to take place in a company?
So it depends on the complexity of the business unit and all that work that is done. And so you define the scope. So obviously it is not just the technology, which often most structured part of the transformation. People and process part is the most difficult part. There are many steps involved. For example, so I would say minimum 9 months, average is about 18, and for large division corporation with the 5-6 business units, it probably could be about 3 years. 3 years involves everything, like the process, the tools, the people competency, the training materials, the KPIs, body planner, making the people effectively use of the tools and that sort of thing.
Got it. So we have a question from our audience also. So to move from silo to end-to-end processes, people have to buy in, like upper management need to buy into the whole supply chain transformation process. So what is your experience and recommendation to gain this kind of traction?
That's really a good point and good observation. So, I mean, in this presentation, I did not allude to that because I kind of thought that is a given. So you really need to start the buy-in from the senior management. That is a good point, a really good point. I mean, you really need to start from there. And in our example, I mean, we actually worked with our clients to sort of work with the senior management. We made the business case, we made the like the financial justification, and got the buy-in from the senior management. So you really need to start from the senior management level. Yes.
Got it. Got it.
I mean, we can help make the business case.
Okay, and Akiva can assist with making a business case for our prospects and our customers, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So one question that also comes to mind is, what part is the driver? Is it the planning or the execution components of this whole transformation process?
So it is really the planning that really should drive the execution, because planning kind of determines the right things to do, and execution determines when and how to do things right. So in that sense, one can be doing very well in execution, only to learn that they were doing the wrong things all along. So that's why we suggest planning should drive the execution with a feedback loop, so that you can redo the plan based on the feedback. And we have this, we could not get into that detail, but that is included in our supply chain transformation approach.
Got it. Got it. Okay, if our audience do have any other question, please feel free to send it to us directly. You can send it to info@akiva.com. But I also like to take the time to say thank you to everyone who had the time to join us today, as well as our presenter for today, Tapan. Thank you so much, and a great job.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Okay, have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.